I feel like I'm always ready to just do whatever sounds fun at the time. And it sounds like you have a very similar approach and story to that.
There's so much emphasis put on like have a plan and like aim for this goal and blah, blah, blah. Like I've never been a goal-oriented person and it's worked out pretty well for me.
If you're in it for a long time, it's likely that you're probably a pretty decent human being.
If you have kind of weak character, it's hard to stick around with something that is so confronting. I mean, you're confronted every day with weakness, essentially.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking part in this immersive listening experience. A meaningful existence is a moving target that, no matter how close, will always be out of reach. We hope this message finds you with an outstretched hand. As we attempt to uncover complex truths, remember, life's toughest questions can be answered if we all just focus on one thing: being good people.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good People, episode 35. Today, I was joined by Adrian Bozman. He is probably best known for his role as the programmer of the CrossFit Games. In today's episode, we talked about Adrian's life, how you don't need to be goal-oriented to achieve success, how to make it as a fitness professional, and how he fell into his role as the programmer for the CrossFit Games. This episode is brought to you by Die Tired. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm currently wearing their service cap. Seriously, it is one of my favorite hats that I own. It looks great. It's super comfortable. They also have a bunch of other gear available on their website: crew necks, t-shirts, stickers. Head on over to dietiredco.com. And if you like what you see, use code GP15 at checkout for 15% off. Before we begin, if you guys are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our weekly uploads. Enjoy the show. Well, boss, thank you so much for doing the show, man. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm glad that I have the time. It's it's always a bit of a scramble before the holiday season to button up a lot of things, as I'm sure that's true for most people. So I'm just glad that we were able to get it on the books, man.
Yeah, same. We started the show probably 7 or 8 months ago now, and I didn't think about this in advance, but we obviously like to book our show a couple weeks in advance. And the last couple weeks, it's been like, oh, actually, I'll be out of town this week, and it's a lot of scrambling to get schedules lined up.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited for this, super pumped for this. I've actually interviewed Graciano Rubio, Wall Street weightlifter, and something that
How cool is that dude?
Dude, so cool. I equate him to the Bruce Lee of fitness. He's like got the philosophy, he's got the actual skills, and he just has like this coolness that is unmatched.
Perfect body double for Bruce Lee too. just a one-for-one stand-in for old Bruce. Yeah, no, that guy's awesome. I can't claim to know him well. Obviously I know his internet presence. I've met him a couple times and we chatted. Actually, this year at the games, ran into him at the after party and chatted with him for a little while. And yeah, he's a great dude.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I got into the CrossFit community in about 2019. I
right
went from ultra marathoning to I found CrossFit via ultra marathoning. And so to me, there's a couple guys that are like these elusive, mystical figureheads in the space that I think are super cool. You're one of those guys. And so that's one of the main reasons why I'm excited to talk to you about the stuff we're going to talk about today.
Well, that's very nice of you to say that. I think, for a lot of us that have been around a long time, like I was having this conversation with my wife. I just turned 40 and I don't feel old, but I can objectively look back and be like, oh, I guess I've done things for a long time now. That's the product of it. And one of those things is CrossFit. And for, I think, many of us that have been involved for many years, it's like it is a grassroots thing, and it always has been. And, I know there's a lot of visibility, especially when we start talking about like CrossFit Games, but in my experience, most of the people involved are still pretty down to earth, and I hope that continues. And honestly, it's really important to me that is the case, because I think that's the power of the whole movement, is that it's grassroots at its core. Lots of things have changed over the years for sure, but I think in essence, like you still go see some of these people at competition, or you see somebody who you've been following, and you go up and say hello, like they're gonna have time for you more often than not,
And this is just an observation. I don't have as much experience to pull from. I'm 23. So I think something that I observe is just anytime you're in a community, whatever that is, for a long time, you kind of see that, just because it's like most time assholes don't really stick around or get pushed out by the people. So I think, at its core, with the community of CrossFit in general, where it's very inclusive and accessible to a lot of people, if you're in it for a long time, it's likely that you're probably a pretty decent human being.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's just hard to, like, if you have kind of weak character, it's hard to stick around with something that is so confronting. I mean, you're confronted every day with weakness, essentially, right? Like, nobody has 100% success rate in the gym. Sooner or later, with a program this varied, something's going to come up where you're like, well, that was a humbling day. And, so you have to be comfortable with that reality. So I do think that's a pretty good weeder. I'll say on the other side, it's like, yeah, you can find an asshole in any group, So like, I don't think we're immune to that, but yeah, I think the ratio is pretty good.
Yeah.
Exceptionally good, I'd say.
Yeah. I guess my point was just, I think, we're not gonna talk about what makes a person an asshole or not, but I think the longer that you stay in the community in general, the more likely you are to, sort of show those qualities. But
yeah, I agree. And actually I'll bolster that a little bit and say that, I don't want to put this on any particular individual, but there certainly have been people that have come in, sometimes from other sporting backgrounds, that have been successful in those sports, and they come in with a bit of a chip on their shoulder. And when they're first involved in CrossFit, they can be a little bit standoffish for that reason. And I think, exactly to your point, I've seen more often than not that the longer they're involved, the more that edge kind of gets rounded off. And I think part of that too is that, people with that kind of competitive aspiration, sooner or later, it's going to wane. Like, not all of us are going to be on top of our game forever. And then, so once that kind of goes away a little bit, or it's not your primary focus, you're kind of confronted with, well, what am I now? And who am I in the context of this community? And I think a lot of people realize at that point, oh, wait, this community is about a lot more. If that wasn't their entry point initially, I think sooner or later, like, you kind of get brought around to that. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing to take that edge off a little bit. And exactly like you said, kind of get people on that path of like, oh, it's way better to be in this mix and, share your time with people, try to give back in a way that makes sense, try to reciprocate, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I would agree with you for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting. I see the fitness in 100 words behind you. I've written, I've posted about it a couple times. I've written growth in 100 words, and one of the lines in it, in the graphic that I made, I have it underlined. It's regularly remind yourself of your own unimportance. And I think, I see that a lot with jujitsu too. I'm a jujitsu guy, and it's the same parallel, maybe even more so, just because is that a jujitsu gi?
Yeah, buddy. And a little grappling.
And I think I see that more so just because, you literally get your ass kicked if you are a bad person. Like, I literally this past week had an instance where this guy hit a submission on one of his training partners, and he got up and celebrated in the gym. And he was like he's a newer guy. He's only been going for a couple months, but one of the upper belts saw it and rolled with him next. He like called him out, and it just was 5 minutes of pure rolling his face on the mat. And so you learn quick.
Yeah. Oh, but it's fun it's great to celebrate a submission on a friend that you're shit talking to. That's I don't know if I can swear, but I just did.
It was one of those situations where like the guy was new.
but I get you.
Yeah. Well, man, can you give us the 30,000 foot view of your life? This can be even outside of the fitness world. Like, what is it that you have going on?
Yeah. Are you more interested in kind of history, like how I got here? Are you interested in like my life now? How do you want to go?
Let's go with like 180 seconds from the time you were born to now. Like what does your life look like?
Man, okay. Sorry, I got walking pneumonia, and so we're dealing with that all month. It's been not so fun. So hold on, I just got to clear my throat a little bit.
No worries.
Okay, you got the timer going, 180 seconds. Hold me to it. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. When I was about 9 years old, we moved to Vancouver Island on the far west coast of British Columbia in Canada. Lived there, went to university there, wanted to be a musician. I was hoping to be a symphony player, played trombone and bass guitar. Dropped out after the second year of that, realized that it wasn't the path for me, moved to San Francisco when I was 20, turning 21. Started getting involved with San Francisco School of Circus Arts and training there. That's when I started personal training to earn some money. And that's around the same time I started dabbling with CrossFit, around 2004. Got my level 1 in 2006, started coaching at San Francisco CrossFit early in that same year, and then started falling in with the CrossFit seminar team that was looking to expand and kind of, push the boundaries of what they were doing in 2007. So I've been working with CrossFit since then, and been the head judge of the CrossFit Games since 2008, worked many seminars all over the world, was responsible for developing a lot of staff materials and instructor materials for that, managed the online courses that we had up until 2021. And in 2021, I kind of moved over full-time to a position with the CrossFit Games. So, early in the company, there was kind of less specific roles for a lot of us. We kind of, shared responsibility around a couple different departments. Things were a little bit looser as we were developing, and now there's a little bit more kind of set tracks for a lot of us. So it was one of those things where responsibilities got to the point that you couldn't juggle everything. So it's like, okay, I gotta kind of land on one. So since then, I've been full-time focus on the games, and that kind of brings us to today. That was my time.
That was pretty much right on time, man. Good job.
Really? You sure? Okay.
No,
cool.
I'm not
I'll
sure. But I think it was. Cayman said it was 1:20.
Okay, so I still got time in the bank.
Okay,
I could riff a little bit, I guess.
Good deal, man.
But that's from life, like birth until now. I think that's a pretty good summation.
Cool. Something I'm super interested in, and with like the case of a lot of people is, you've dedicated a large chunk of your life to this one like niche thing, which is fitness and the craft. And sometimes it seems that no matter what anybody's interested in, especially if it's one of these things that is hobby turned career, generally people have like this early connection in some way to it. I know for me, like I started working out when I was like 15, 16. What did your start to fitness look like? When did you start? When you were like, I really like this thing?
Yeah, that resonates a lot, actually. So I was never really like a super athletic kid growing up. I grew up in a relatively small area in Canada. The sport culture there is not nearly what it is in the United States, for example. Like for example, the high school I went to, we had a rugby team that I was aware of, but it wasn't like a thing. People weren't going to their games. It wasn't really on my radar. That said, my parents were really good about getting me involved in everything growing up, on a recreational level. So, I did kind of soccer, and I played baseball, and I played, whatever was available in season at the time, but not on any serious level. It was just, like after school program type stuff growing up when you're in elementary school, that sort of thing. What really kind of stuck for me early was gymnastics. I did gymnastics pretty seriously from about the age of 6 until I was probably 12, 13. I wasn't competitive. I wasn't like really good at it, but it was one thing that I kind of stuck with more than anything else. And then when I stepped away from that, in kind of early teenagerhood, I guess, I got into rock climbing and hiking and a lot of outdoor stuff with my brother. So a lot of those type of activities. And then when I was about 16 is when I started going to the gym more seriously. My dad, he's a chiropractor. And so in the town we were living in, he had some kind of in-kind relationships with some of the businesses around town. And one of those was free membership at this like bodybuilding gym. I still remember it was awesome. It was called Sugars. And it was like an old school kind of bodybuilding iron pit gym. And we had keys to it because that was kind of the deal, is like he just had like free access to it. And so I remember going to work out in Sugars with my dad and my brother. And, I'd ride my bike down there and go like hit some bench press or whatever. It wasn't anything serious. And then I started independently just kind of getting the bug. And I remember early on, I started like getting into some of these kind of more niche things, or at least at the time they were like kettlebells were just kind of coming on. This is like 1999, 2000. When kettlebells were just starting to kind of get back into North America, at least in like any sort of high visibility way. So I actually built my own kettlebells. I got into that. I started getting into things like, the basic power lifts and Olympic lifts, which again, in a commercial gym in the early 2000s, like that just wasn't a thing. You didn't see people doing that. So I had an interest in those things. I wasn't like a naturally strong athlete. It wasn't like there was no real competitive drive or interest beyond like, hey, I think this is fun. And I think it planted the seeds for, hey, I think this is really like good for you. But it wasn't really that well articulated or thought out, right? It was just like, yeah, this makes sense and I like doing it. So I did.
Good deal. When did you start to find structure to that?
I mean, early on, I had a lot of structure. Like I followed a ton of I really took a lot of inspiration from like old bodybuilders, like the golden era in the late 60s and 70s. Like I still have like Bill Pearl books and like Arnold's Encyclopedia and stuff like that. So, like dabbling with those routines. God, I can't remember. I have a whole library of books. There's one called Power by Bill. I can't remember his last name now. But that was a big, like when I found that book, I was so stoked. It's hard to find now. So that was a good one. Some great routines in there. So yeah, there was a lot of structure early on, but it wasn't really focused with a particular goal. It was just like, hey, here's a program. And like you show up and you just do the program, but there was no real like outlet for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'll share my story with it, with sort of how I found CrossFit. And I'm interested to hear how it all came together for you. It sounds like you were very similar. Like when I got to college, I was like 2 years, I had this nearly 50-pound weight loss when I was late in high school. Like I was the overweight fat kid.
Man, good for you. That's not easy.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I was the relief guy on the soccer team. I played 5 minutes a half, played soccer my whole life. When I finally realized how much I was into fitness and getting in shape, it was too late. I was like, I can't make up that lost time. I won't be able to continue to play soccer in college. So I went to college and I did what I was doing at the gym at home. Very similar. It was a very bodybuilder-esque gym. Like dudes doing kipping tricep extensions, just like meatheads. It was awesome, right? My brother taught me how to lift for the most part. He just showed me what they did for the baseball team at school. And so when I got to college, I kind of started doing the same thing. My roommate at the time was a runner, and we signed up for this 50-mile ultra marathon together. It actually ended up working out that he didn't run it. I was the only one that ran it. But through that whole time, I essentially...
That's awesome. I love that. Hey, come do this thing with me.
I know, dude. Yeah. That's a very short version of that story. But through that training, I was like, man, I'm spending all this time in the gym, but I'm running way more. I can't, and I've got school and I got friends. I can't do it all at once. And so I'm on the internet. How can I make my workouts more efficient? I stumble upon CrossFit. This is the first time I've ever heard of it, like 2019. And then I start doing what I think is CrossFit at the time. It's funny you said all of those things that you were getting into were still sort of like fringe things, but I remember doing like open workouts in the corner of the university gym and everybody was looking at me like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like I'm doing burpees over a bar and that sort of thing. And so I don't even know what compelled me to it. I just knew that I really liked what I was doing. And so after I did my 50 miler, I just went and took my L1. I had never been to a CrossFit gym before.
Yep.
And when I got back to school, my bright idea was, why don't I just go ahead and reach out to the CrossFit gyms in town and they'll let me intern.
Yep.
I've got my foot in the door. I'm a CrossFit coach now. I actually only reached out to one.
I love it.
They took the chance on me and, I went through what I thought was going to just be this like part-time college gig to like,
Yep.
oh, I'm almost done with my degree in communications and I don't want anything to do with it. And I want to do this forever. And so, I graduate college and I'm the first full-time employee at the gym that I now work for. But anyways, I've been through it all as well. Like rock climbing. I've done a couple of ultra marathons, jujitsu. I just love fitness and moving
Yeah.
my body. And CrossFit is the thing that no matter what I'm doing, as long as it's going on in the background, I feel like I'm always ready to just do whatever sounds fun at the time. And it sounds like you have a very similar approach and story to that.
Yeah, for sure. So, man, a couple things that you're kind of recapped there jogged in my memory. The first is that, I'll give you my old man yells at cloud story, which is back in my day, you know what I mean? Like you could not even just buy most of these pieces of equipment that are so prominent now. Like I think about the first kettlebell that I bought, and I still own it. And I was broke at the time, and it was a big deal to shell out, however much it cost. I was like, I don't know, is this a good idea? I still have it, right? But you had to special order. There was one company that had kettlebells, and like that was it. Like you could not buy weightlifting shoes, you could not buy bumper plates. Like these things were just kind of exotic items that were very hard to come across. So it's cool to see how things have changed, for the better. Second thing that you kind of jogged in there is that I love that you basically just followed an interest with no plan or idea as to what the end state could look like. I think that's really healthy personally. And I feel like there's so much messaging these days. I mean, just so much crappy messaging anyway, but there's so much emphasis put on like have a plan and like aim for this goal and blah blah blah. Like I've never been a goal oriented person, and it's worked out pretty well for me. It's not to say that goals are bad or that like that's a bad strategy, but I do think that the beauty of life is that you don't know, and you can't and like you cannot control it. You can put yourself on a path and kind of aim in a direction, sure, but at the end of the day, I think you have a lot to lose if you have this rigid plan and you think you're just going to grind and discipline your way into like this perfect end state. I bet you when you get there, it's not going to be very satisfying if you get there at all. And so I'm a big believer that you have to try to stay connected with the unpredictability of life in the best and worst possible ways, and set yourself up in a way where, yeah, it's okay to dive into something without a real clear picture as to where it could go or what it could offer you, other than like, yeah, it just feels like the right thing to do. I think there's a lot of value in that, and I think that gets understated a lot in our culture today, unfortunately. So that's cool to hear your story around that, because it very much resonates with me. And then third thing, I guess, to get back to kind of how it all came together. So, I was dabbling with all these different activities growing up. Like I said, I started teaching myself like the power lifts and like really basic Olympic lifting. It was terrible, looking back. And I had an interest in kettlebells, and I grew up doing gymnastics. And so like in an unarticulated way, I saw the value of being well-rounded physically. And again, I didn't have any real strong competitive aspirations for anything. I just wanted to be capable. It was like, yeah, it makes sense to like have a platform that you could do what you want. And so then I stumbled across the document that Greg Glassman wrote all those years ago called What is Fitness? And when I read that for the first time, because at that time I was like a kind of a junkie for like different fitness outlets. I was always, it's like early days of the internet, kind of. And I was always bouncing around from kind of obscure fitness website to obscure fitness website and message boards and stuff. And I guess long story short is that on a lot of those places, you would read something and you're like, yeah, that's cool if you only want to get stronger. I'll try to take some of that and incorporate it. Yeah, that's cool if all I care about is being flexible. I'll take some of that and incorporate it. When I read What is Fitness for the first time, it was the first thing that I read that I was like, yeah, like everything in this, I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I've been looking for, is that I want this compromise where, like, yeah, I don't want to be the strongest person at the expense of not being able to like get up a flight of stairs, I want to have like crazy flexibility, but not at the extent of not being able to pick up my backpack. And so that document really hooked me. because it just talked about this breadth of capacity that was possible. And like from then on, I was like, okay, this has like codified all of the things that I've been dabbling with. And I was kind of all in at that point.
Mm. Yeah, that's one of the ones that we have a Slack channel with our coaches. It's coaches development, and I send that one.
That's awesome.
Pretty frequently, like every couple months, like, hey, make sure you reread What is Fitness. Like it's it's the thing to me that is like, just remember the basics and then keep doing this forever until you die and you've done a good job.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, like looking back at that, like I remember when I read the first time and like how powerful it was. And I've certainly revisited it a lot over the years. And it's really crazy to me how relevant it is, 20 years later. And it's still like, in my opinion, pretty revolutionary, even though there's so much more of it happening. And I wouldn't say it's mainstream. I don't think we're mainstream yet, but we're definitely like creeping towards that. Yeah, it is kind of wild that those ideas are still so powerful and pretty groundbreaking. Like I think there's lots of people that kind of dabble with it and then step away from it, or didn't really allow the philosophy to sink in. Yeah, and so like I do think there's a lot of kind of derivatives that have like evolved in a way that just kind of missed the mark. So coming back to that, I think, is a really, really good grounding. So that's cool that you guys, number one, that you do staff development. I know a lot of affiliates struggle with that. And number two, that you guys are back to the basics on it. Like that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. There's, with any sort of career in fitness, particularly, like I'll go and I'll coach for a certain amount of months, and then I reread the L1 guide probably every year and a half. Right.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
And I've just started rereading it again. And there was a change that I made to how I program workouts where before I do anything, I start with the stimulus of each day for whatever time period that I'm doing. And I have this chart where it's just like short, moderate, long distance. And then the other side of the axis is light, moderate, heavy weight. And to me, when I came up with that in my head, I'm like, wow, I'm a genius. And like now I'm rereading the L1 manual. And I'm like, oh, this is actually in here. Like I didn't come up with this.
No, but hey, I mean, it's great that like independently or perhaps with like some subconscious influence, like, yeah, you arrived there too. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's great. That's the way it should be. It should be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And this is the way that I would approach it anyway. Oh yeah, here it is. Right? Like if you arrived at a vastly different conclusion, well then there might be a problem there, and not necessarily with your approach, but like if it's as universal as we contend that it is, lots of people should be arriving at like a pretty similar landing point,
Yeah. I'm interested to hear your perspective as somebody who, you kind of came up in a time where I even would say now that like what I'm doing as a fitness professional isn't from an outsider's perspective, like an admirable career to shoot for. Like, oh, this guy just trains people. But you probably went through that even more so. And I'm interested if you have any advice for people that are desiring to be fitness professionals. I know you mentioned the have fun piece, which is something that I really push on people as well. Like, I'm very similar. People always ask me like, hey man, when are you going to compete in jiu-jitsu? And I'm like, probably not. I just like doing this thing. And having fun is one of those principles for me that I think is very important for any sort of pursuit. But I'm wondering, is there any other advice that you have for people trying to be a fitness professional?
Yeah, advice is tough. I mean, I have a hard time giving advice because, there's so many different approaches. There's so many different personalities. It's really hard to throw things out there broadly, but I'll take a stab at it. Number one, to your initial point, talking around this idea that it's not really like a viable career path, you have to just brush that aside. And if you want to make it one, there are absolutely great ways to do that. And don't let anybody tell you that the impact that you're having is insignificant or that it's an unworthy pursuit. That's ridiculous. I mean, I can't think of anything that's, there are a few things, but in the immediate sense, if you're thinking about the impact that you can have on your community and the real people in it, offering them a path to lifelong health and independence is a pretty powerful thing, even if that's not seen easily by the outside. I mean, that is at the bedrock, kind of the bare minimum for somebody to be productive and happy and moving through life in a positive trajectory. So to be able to offer that to your immediate community is a pretty powerful thing. And I know lots of professional types, and I've experienced this over the years, where you have people that have quote unquote real jobs, and they come to you after a certain period of time and they're burned out and they're, disillusioned, frankly, a lot of times, because they've spent years and years and years doing something that on the balance, you look back and you're like, you know what, the impact wasn't that significant. I did a good job making money for somebody else. But at the end of the day, is anybody really going to remember the impact I had on this X corporation when I stepped away or whatever? And a lot of people come to the conclusion that no, it doesn't. But the impact that you could have on another individual or group of individuals is very significant. So I guess the question is, like, why is that hard for people to see, and why is it not valued? And I come back to the gradual nature of it, and the necessity of it being a sustained effort, right? Like, it's not good enough to have one good workout and then you're like, well, that's it. I've done my job here, right? Like, it has to be a continued agreement. And because of the incremental nature of it and the long trajectory, I think it's harder for people to see a success or a value in that, unfortunately, right? And especially, sorry, especially when you think about kind of this idea of avoiding catastrophe. Do you know what I mean? And so, sorry, one more time. Hold on.
No worries.
I'll put it to you this way. What is more important? And we'll use your example here, and this is, rhetorical. Somebody who is overweight and established that, yep, I'm overweight, I need to do something, and they lose that weight, or somebody who has established from the get-go, I have the tendency to be overweight, I'm going to proactively make sure that I never become overweight, and I'm going to take those steps, right? I would say they're both equal in terms of like the importance and the outcome. The outcome is, hey, you've landed in a healthy place and hopefully you can keep that up. What's visible from the outside is that person that was overweight and then lost a lot of weight, very commendable. That's easy to see. It's not easy to see somebody who's just been grinding it out for months and years in an attempt to stave off that disposition. That's something that's tough to place value on because you never saw the catastrophe, because it's been avoided. You know what I mean? And so I don't know if that's just human nature.
You have to be a bit of a visionary in that way.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, I guess you're asking somebody without having gone through that, like walk that path. They basically have to try to see years of a process versus like one before and after. And so for whatever reason, I think that lends itself to not being as valued, which is too bad, but it's also the opportunity for you, the fitness professional, to like educate people on that and be like, hey, yeah, this is valuable. And yeah, I am committed to it. And look how much I'm going to put into you and your success. I mean, that's how you keep people around, You just make sure that they understand how serious you take it and how vested you are in their success. Like, that's huge.
I would even like to echo your first point, which is, ignoring when people say like, what are you doing? Or they question this or whatever. Do you watch Rick and Morty, or have you seen it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm not current, but I've seen like the first couple seasons. Yeah.
Okay. There's this clip where, I can't remember what season it is, but when you said that, it reminded me, there's like this huge crowd and this alien guy that is very motivational speaker, like preachy to this audience. And Rick comes out on stage and people start booing him, like boo, boo, boo. And he says something along the lines of, your boos mean nothing. I've seen what you clap for. And it's just interesting. I feel like, why do we put so much stock in what people think, when in reality those people are probably in the position that you just described, where they've worked their whole life at this thing that when they look back on, they're like, yeah, I don't really know what kind of difference I've made.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that scene. That's pretty hilarious. Are you a Community fan?
No.
You should go back and watch Community. It starts a little slow, but the second season's great. And it's Dan Harmon, who's big in Rick and Morty world. But anyway.
Okay. Is Community like a, what do you call it? What kind of show is it? Sitcom?
Yeah. You can see, like, as they get deeper into it, you're like, okay, yeah, it makes sense that this is evolved into like a Rick and Morty.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check it out. I heard Ben Bergeron say this once, where he's like, if you get recommended a book twice, you should read it. And I'm going to apply that to this TV show.
There you go. Yeah. First season, it starts a little slow, but yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Well, let's pick back up. Something that I really would like to talk with you about is program design. When did program design become an interest of yours in your fitness journey?
I mean, from the jump, right? Like, it was always fun to write programs for my friends. Like, I had early personal training job that was like a big part of it. And so it's always been fun for me to write programs for other people. And like, I can look back, like my wife and I, we've been together a long time. And early on, we used to work out together. I used to write programs for her. And like, we're talking like straight up just in a little notebook. Like it's pretty cool actually going back to like these notebooks from 2005 that have kettlebell programs that I wrote for her in there, and taking a look at some of those. And I'm like, yeah, some of these still hold up. I wouldn't change much, you know? So I think it's always kind of been in the mix. And to me, it's been kind of the fun. And I've always been very firm in my conviction that nobody's got this on lock. Everybody is convinced that like, well, my way is the way to the top of the mountain. And that's just not true when you're talking program. Like, there's no one thing that is just going to be universally successful and guarantee result. It's not true. So tinkering with these things is just, I don't know. I've always found it to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I have this huge stack of paper in my desk that's just like all of the weeks that I've written for my affiliate. And
yeah,
sometimes if I'm stumped, a lot of times what I like to do is have like a center point to my week. I know I'm going to do this workout on this day, and then I build everything else sort of around it. And if I don't really have a starting point, I'll just pull a paper out and I'll like put my finger on one. I'm like, this is what we're going to do. And it's fun to do stuff like that.
Totally. And I think it's great to have record of all that, because you'll find that you'll go through cycles, both creatively and motivationally. And so going back to that, sometimes you can kind of get reconnected with great ideas that you might have had in the past and they just never had an outlet, or great ideas that you're like, oh man, I remember doing that. It was so good. Well, how come we haven't done that in months? So yeah, that's awesome. I love that approach. And I think like any creative process, the blank piece of paper is the hardest thing to overcome. Like, it's so easy to go from one workout to like 10, but going from no workouts to that first one on the piece of paper can be tough.
Yeah, I give that advice to people too, actually. I don't remember what that device is called at the eye doctor, that they're like, is it this one or is it this one? Like, is this one better or is this one better? I'm like, anytime I'm stumped with something or I don't know what I prefer, I just put something next to it. And then I'm like, it's easier to change something if you have something to compare it to.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there any lens that you look through programming from? Like broadly, a lens?
Yes. And it depends, like my job now, at least the high visibility job that I have for, games programming, there's a really specific public outcome. And that is either it's qualifying somebody to the next stage, so it has to be complete enough to perform that function, or at the big show, it has to be well-rounded enough that we can take a lot of pride in the claim that, yeah, this is the fittest person on earth. And so when we're talking about that domain specifically, yes, I have like it kind of looks like a serial killer chart, with all the different strings attached to it, and straight up like Charlie Day kind of meme looking there. But Yeah, it's a lot. Duration, number of movements, function of the movements, different modalities and how they overlap, the equipment profile, like all of these things are different lenses that we look at, or that I look at, as like an initial vetting. And then when that starts to make sense, it's like, okay, we've got something that can be refined. And a lot of times, to your earlier point, you have a couple of different workouts, you're trying to put them together in a set and you're not sure if they're right. Kind of going through those filters can really make decisions for you, because actually when you look under the hood, you're like, oh, we've got, 4 different hinging movements and we've only got 1 squatting movement. Well, it's pretty obvious we need to change tack a little bit here once you see it laid out like that. But yeah, so for game stuff, yes, there's a pretty thorough filtering that it has to go through. I had the privilege to program for the main site a couple months ago for a couple weeks, which was a blast back in September. And for that, it was a little bit looser, right? Because the outcome doesn't have to be as rigid. There's a little bit more flexibility, I think, day to day when you're putting a program together for people that are just looking to get fit. The same basic recommendations apply, but you have a little bit more freedom to experiment.
Yeah, and I think with that, there's so much that goes into it, because it's like it was 2 weeks. What tools do people have? What fitness level are they at? Anything and everything goes when it regards to a general population program that I understand, like, it can be hard to pin down. So let's kind of use this next part of the conversation from the lens of CrossFit Games programming, just because I think that's probably what most people who are listening, would recognize you from, unless you have some other like career or whatever that you haven't told people about. But with your evolution as a programmer, I'm interested to see what the journey from, okay, workouts are fun to program, to like, I'm now programming the CrossFit Games. So I understand it's probably not quite those early days where I know you said you've sort of always been interested in writing those workouts, but
Yeah.
From the day you were head judge, sort of what did that look like, your journey to, okay, I'm the guy now that's doing this?
Yeah. Well, I was lucky to get involved early. So I had a big hand in developing the games into what they are today, from the kind of competition side and the nuts and bolts of how they actually are conducted. Developed a lot of those processes along with a lot of other people at the time that were heavily involved. But again, you look at the kind of the modern CrossFit competition and the way it runs and kind of the standards that have been passed down. Like, we developed a lot of those early on. And so really it was just kind of a product of doing it, where everybody at that time, again, if we extend this idea of kind of being broad in our approach, like nobody was just a coach and relied on somebody else's program, because it kind of didn't exist, like this landscape of like, I have 15 different high level programs that I can just pick from and I don't have to think about it. Like, that wasn't a thing. You had the main site, and you had a couple other people that had like adapted the main site to, maybe focus on strength a little bit more or focus on certain elements. But there really wasn't this kind of landscape that we see today. And so by extension, like, everybody who coached also wrote workouts. Like, that's just what you did. And at the time I was working and programming for the affiliate that I worked at, San Francisco CrossFit. That was kind of a joint effort. At that point, the coaching staff was responsible for the classes that they coached. So if you were coaching, Monday, for example, well, it was your day to write that. Like, you had Monday, you know what I mean? And so on. So everybody was expected to have pretty good proficiency. And it was fun in those days because, you could insert a good idea after a couple of years when it's like, all right, the team's starting to trust each other. Like, we've worked together. We know that we're good in a pinch. You'd float ideas to Dave and you'd be like, hey man, this is like something I think that would be really cool to do. And he'd think about it. And if it was, then he would include it. Or the other end, like early on, Dave was always really good about bouncing stuff back to the team and being like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And then we'd be able to, craft it that way. So it was really organic in that sense, contributing via the review of it, contributing via ideas that you had that you thought would be good to include, and just getting more and more involved. And as the stages of the season evolved, first with the Open and then regionals and then some of these other competitions that we had, it was just kind of natural because it was more than one person could take on with everything else that we had at that time happening. Meaning, people had jobs that had 4 or 5 different responsibilities tied into them. And so as one of those responsibilities became larger and larger, there were more opportunities for people to input on them, simply because they just couldn't be managed by one person. So yeah, it was really organic. And then in 2021, when I moved over, again, that was kind of an extension of that. It's like, hey, this thing's getting big enough. We need somebody who's like a little more dedicated to that end of it. And then unfortunately 2022, Dave got fired. And so I got put in the hot seat there, and good news, he's back. And so now we get to kind of double up on that stuff. And, yeah, like I said, it was an organic thing. It really just grew out of all of us doing it. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
no, that answers it. And I'll echo that. I think in general, probably from like a public persona thing, we assume that, to reference my mystical figures of CrossFit comment I made earlier, like I would say Dave's probably on that list. We, from an outside perspective, I think a lot of times we put these people up here where it's like, they have some level of knowledge that we don't. But what you just described is how I program for our gym, where like a member will say like, hey, remember like 6 months ago we did that one thing and we haven't done that since. That's a great idea. And then I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. And then I sort of play around with that and get a bit more creative with a new application of it. And so it's the same organic. There's a team. There's a certain community tribe element of these are the people that are involved. And naturally over time, as you build relationships with others, you have the confidence to make suggestions. And, at the end of it, what you see is there were these events at the CrossFit Games and Boz is the programmer, but that's not really true. There's so many people that are involved with the creation and the testing and the modification of a lot of those things before they're actually done on the big stage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a whole process. And, Dave, I think, has done a great job of creating a focal point in, the Dave Castro that people can point to, and they can love it or they can hate it, or, they have an outlet for that because, and in fairness, like, yeah, a lot of that generation was, the idea generation was his, but it's not to say that there wasn't like a team behind it that ultimately gets it there. But, from a public consumption point of view, like that's harder and less compelling, honestly, right? When it's like, well, there's a team and rah, rah, rah. It's like, no, man, we just want the one guy that we can either throw rocks at or lift above our head in triumph,
Yeah. Is there anything that still surprises you about programming in general?
Yeah. I mean, I think we'll take it back to the old jiu-jitsu thing. It's like, it's so vast. You can get really good at one aspect and then you look up a little bit and you're like, oh man, I haven't even considered some of these other things. Or you get introduced to something and you get really hot on it for a while and you're like, man, this is so cool. You kind of fall down that rabbit hole. So I think being reminded of that is fun. And like, I love that there's so much out there now because there are some creative approaches that they're like, man, I would not have thought to go down that route, but it's really cool. And I think it's a good idea to incorporate, I can't think of one off the cuff that illustrates that, but that's the beauty of so many people doing it is like, man, some of the ideas that come back are so cool. That like you can't expect that yourself is going to be as creative as the mass, right? And so it's fun to be able to kind of comb through and look at some of that and see what the community has been able to come back with.
I know Dave was like this. There's a lot of literature influence on, a lot of the names that he comes up with for events and his application of certain usage of numbers or things like that. Are there any other things in that regard that you seem to do, like any outside influence? I know you're into motorcycles and tattoos and I would imagine lots of other things outside of fitness. Are there any ways that you've thought, or maybe subconsciously or not, that those other interests have crept into the style of programming that you have?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's I mean, hey man, if I have to sum it up in a word, it's freedom, and freedom from the confines of like one strict ideological approach. I think that's the beauty of CrossFit, is that you can experiment with all these different inputs, and it doesn't always have to be codified. And personally, like, it's tricky when you start talking about competition, because by its nature, competition has to be somewhat codified so that it can be contested fairly. So there's a little bit of a tension there that arises naturally, where you're like, okay, if we're going to compete in this thing, there has to be enough standard that we can. But on the training front, I think it's a mistake to approach it that way, because there's so many things that don't make good competition because they're hard to codify, but they're absolutely worth exploring in training and within the methodology. And I think a lot of the things that I'm drawn to outside, music, tattoos, motorcycles, like kind of weird outside culture, speaks to that, right? Like, there is a place for it. It is valuable. But no, it's not easy to codify, and no, it's not easy to explain to other people sometimes, but there's still value in it. So yeah, I think there is a big influence there.
What are some of those things that are worth exploring outside of competition?
Well, I mean, I think gymnastics movements are an obvious one. There's so many gymnastics movements that will not lend themselves well to competition, but they're awesome training devices. They're skills that are worth pursuing and having fun with. So that's an obvious one. I think that there's plenty of different formats that may not lend themselves well to competition that are also great for training. And so, like, I think when people get too myopic thinking about like the games or competition, unfortunately, a lot of people start to lose sight of some of these things, or they discard them as being less valuable, right? And it's like they can't make the distinction that training is supposed to accelerate my ability. It's not supposed to mimic competition, right? There's a place for that too. If you're like a high level competitor and that's what you really want to do, sure, you have to be familiar with what you expect to see. But if that's all you're focusing on, you're going to miss some of the real benefits of some of these other approaches.
Well, listen, man, I know we're getting close on time. The one question I want to make sure I ask you is, we try to ask everybody this, but I forget a lot of times, and I didn't want to forget with you. What do you think it means to be a good person?
I saw that on the list. Hey, I have to say too, you are like the most organized interviewee that I've ever. No, I'm serious, man. I like, over the years, I've done a lot of these, and your outline was phenomenal. I was like, wow, this is giving me the more opportunity to prepare than maybe I'm even comfortable with. So thanks for that. So when I saw that question on there, I was like, dude, I don't know how to answer that one. So I'll try to keep it simple, because, man, I ramble a lot. But to me, I think it's as simple as just doing what you say you're going to do. I mean, I think at its core, that's a big part of it. If you say you're going to do something, do it and try to follow through. And I fall short of that. And that's always something that's kind of top of mind for me, to try to, be consistent with. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Cool. Well, thank you for that nice compliment. That means a lot to me. I know you probably can't do this, but I'm going to ask you. I didn't include this in the question, but is there any teasers or Easter eggs that you can drop for the season coming up, 2024 season?
No, come on, man. I can't do that. And it's like, it's the line I use all the time. You wouldn't want to open your Christmas presents early. It takes away from it. So
I love opening my Christmas presents early.
No, I can't, unfortunately, but it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to the season. And man, thanks again for having me. I got to run, unfortunately.
Yeah, no worries at all. I want to be respectful of your time, but yeah, thank you very much for doing this. This was awesome. Great to get to know you.
Yeah, right on, man. And let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode of Good People. I really enjoyed talking to Adrian. I hope you guys enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. Before we head out, if you guys are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our weekly uploads. Interacting with our channel in any way really does help us out a ton. If while you were listening, you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone you love, perhaps your grandma. We'll see you next time.